I loved the man. I did.
I'm so glad.
I loved him. He was such a great guy, and a huge impact in my life. And I consider it one of the great honors of my life, having to been in that place where I got to work for him and work around him in a way that very, 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 very few employees at Focus ever did.
A titan of American evangelicalism has gone home to be with the Lord. Dr. James Dobson is one of the most influential American evangelicals of the late 20th century and certainly the first quarter of the 21st century, a man who wrote 70 books, most of them New York Times bestsellers, on parenting, on family, on marriage, on the culture, and all from a biblical perspective. This is a man who had the biggest Christian radio show in the country, and a show that was not just heard in the United States, but around the world, and one in very interesting and very influential country. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But Dr. Jim Dobson was an advisor to 5 American presidents. He was a man who fought abortion. He fought the spread of expanded special unique rights for homosexuals. He cared about adoption. He cared about special needs. He cared about marriage. He cared about how to raise boys, how to raise girls to be men, to be women, to be followers of the Lord Jesus Christ. He loved Jesus. He loved the Word. He loved the church. He loved the family. He loved his family. And he also loved Israel. And that's one of the areas that I connected with him on: his love for Israel, his love for the God of Israel, and his love for Bible prophecy, and his belief that people who love Jesus need to love Israel and her neighbors. We're going to talk about all of it today in a very special program, remembering the life, the faith, and the impact of Dr. James Dobson. Hi, this is Joel Rosenberg, founder and president of the Joshua Fund, a ministry to bless Israel and her neighbors, a ministry that Dr. James Dobson learned about when we started talking on the show, and we'll get to all that in just a few moments. But I want to say, as we begin, I was going to get to see him in a few weeks. He'd invited me to spend some time with he and Shirley and some of his friends and prayer partners, and I was really looking forward to that. This is just literally a few weeks from now, and I'm very sad that's not going to happen, that I'm going to have to wait to walk the streets of glory with him. But I look forward to that day, and I'd ask you to be praying for his family, for his team, for his community, and I want to remember him and honor him on this show today. Welcome to Inside the Epicenter. But first, I want to introduce a man that worked for him for 15 years in a range of capacities. You're going to hear about that in just a moment. This is a man who not only was close to Dobson and helped him build those radio shows and help him get his voice on thousands of radio stations to millions and millions and millions of people, both believers, and I would say probably mostly believers, but also to unbelievers who were hungry and desperate at times to find good teaching, something solid, how to raise their children, even if they hadn't bought the whole gospel message. Steve Reiter is not only somebody who worked for Dr. Dobson for 15 years, but he's the producer of this podcast. Steve Reiter, you're in Colorado Springs. I'm in Paris right now. That will maybe mention that later, why Lynn and I are here in Paris. But I just want to welcome you to the podcast, a podcast that you and your team produce all the time. But I wanted to have you on today because you know this man better than me. I counted him a real friend, and I was supposed to see him in a few weeks. But I just thought, what better way to honor him than somebody who knew him, not just his reputation outside, but you spent a lot of time, 15 years behind the scenes with him. Steve, how are you? Good to have you. Sorry for this loss, but on the other hand, he's happier than ever, finally at the feet of Jesus, worshiping him.
Yeah, we went out to lunch, I want to say 3 years ago, and I hadn't seen him in a few years before that at a funeral. That was the previous time I had seen him. I left in 2012, and so I've been gone now for 13 years. And so, but when we went to lunch 3 years ago, I was shocked at how much he aged, because Doc was a guy, and I called him Doc. I'm one of the few people around Focus that called him Doc, and we just had this great, fun, playful relationship.
Hey, what's up, Doc?
Well, I mean, Doc was the kind of guy where if he liked you, he would playfully give you grief, and he would always give me grief about being from Wisconsin. I remember one time he did it on a broadcast where we
Oh,
were
wow.
out and about, and he's like, "Oh, Steve Reiter here's from Wisconsin. We'll forgive him for that." Ha ha ha. And so, but I remember how I saw him aging and how much he had started to hunch over a little bit, and he had the old man shuffle. And so I saw this coming, and I get together regularly with his son, Ryan. He and I are good friends. And I remember talking with
his show for a number of, I think 6 years or
yes,
so.
which was my idea actually.
Oh, okay.
So the story is I worked for him for 15 years in total. I moved my way up through the ranks, and in 2007, I became the chief audio engineer and managed the daily broadcast production team. And so whenever he would record, I was the one that went with him most likely, almost always, when he record off site. And when he was doing recordings in Colorado Springs, I was usually the one that would do it unless I had to pass it off to one of my other teammates. Being in that position where I was his chief audio engineer and we would travel, like we would record in December, opens and closes for January re-airs. And when we didn't get enough done, Doc spent the month of January every year to get out of the cold at his modest 2-bedroom condo in Palm Desert. And because we couldn't have the AC clicking on and off, we'd turn it down. Doc and Shirley would turn it down as far as they could, and then we'd shut it off. And we'd be sitting around, me, Doc, John Fuller, in shorts and T-shirts. Shirley made the best freaking lemonade I've ever had. It was so good. It was so nice to drink. We'd break for lunch, turn the AC back on, all go out to lunch. And then once we were done, we'd almost always go out to dinner. And my favorite story comes from one of these trips where we broke for dinner, went to Doc and Shirley's Mrs. D, as I called her, went to their favorite Mexican restaurant there in Palm Desert. And afterwards, Doc wanted to take us to his favorite frozen yogurt place. And as we were walking out, they saw some friends that they knew and they wanted to go say hi. Well, John Fuller and I started walking out to the car. I had to break off to use the restroom. And when I came out, Doc and Shirley were about 6 to 10 feet in front of me, and they were holding hands. Here's a couple that had been married 47, 48 years at the time. I forget which it was.
Wow.
And I saw the way they loved each other. They adored each other.
College
they were
sweethearts, right? I think they met in college.
Yes. Yeah. Hearing the stories of them dating, it's one of those storybook romances that I got to see up front, up close and personal.
Yeah.
And I always said, everything you heard Dr. Dobson on the air, he was all that and more behind the scenes. He wasn't this duplicitous person where he was this kind person on the air and behind closed doors. He was a real jerk. No, he was somebody that loved his team, loved the people that he worked with. He demanded excellence. He was type A, and people that didn't resonate with that didn't stay very long. But I'm someone that I thrived in that environment, and he and I just really just got along well.
I'm so glad. I think it's important to say that in addition to writing, I believe 70 books, this was a man who had his PhD. He was a trained
clinical psychologist
and focused on family psychology, children's psychology. He wrote some books that were really game changers. Dare to Discipline. Maybe his most famous book, because Dr. Dobson emerged as a voice of how to raise children with biblical counsel, biblical wisdom, and he was pushing back at the other famous voice,
Dr. Benjamin Spock.
Yeah, Dr. Benjamin Spock. It's funny. I was talking to a friend the other day, and it was a group of people of us on this call, and she. One of our friends, she's just young, and she's like, Dr. Spock, what does Star Trek have to do with any of this? And I'm like, no, not Mr. Spock. It was Dr. Spock. And Dr. Benjamin Spock, for those of you who may be also young and thinking that I'm talking about, Leonard Nimoy, I'm not. Dr. Benjamin Spock was the famous child specialist in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and a very permissive approach towards raising your children. Give them lots of freedom. Don't discipline them. Don't spank them. Let them develop without a lot of constraints and a lot of rules. And now, Dr. Dobson, I want to be clear, wasn't saying, be hard and legalistic, but he came from a biblical perspective, which is, spare the rod, spoil the child. Now, he was super clear. We're not talking about child abuse. And he talked about in the book and, many books and on the radio, what does it mean to discipline your children? But dare to discipline, because children need discipline. That's how you show them love. And that's how you keep them from becoming their worst possible selves, which is they've got sin inside of them. And
he said it. I heard him say it so many times. Open defiance. That's the only time that you bring corporal punishment in, and you bring it in a loving way. He didn't want you to use your hand. He wanted to use some other object, and don't make it so hard that it's borderline abuse, but do it in a way that just captures their attention and brings them out of that.
Yeah. You're not trying to associate your hand with punishment. But you are trying to associate, if you defy me, there is a consequence, and it's not just standing in the corner for 2 minutes, or 10 minutes. So anyway, that's not the focus of Inside the Epicenter, but what you have here is a man who wrote, Dare to Discipline. And this was the book that, rocked the world for those who hated him. That's why they hated him at that time. Then over time, he had other books, Bringing Up Boys, based on tremendous amount of research. He was an expert in these areas. It wasn't like he was just spitballing. He wasn't, a talk radio show host who had no idea what he was talking about and, was giving sort of pop psychology. Bringing Up Girls, again, based on years of research, as well as his own application of scripture, but also a range of books on marriage and what every man needs, what wives want their men to know, and so he came at things from a lot of different angles. But he also had this real love for Israel, and so early on, I first met him when a friend of Lynn's and mine, who was in our Bible study in Washington, D.C., that friend was working in the Bush 41 administration. And when George H.W. Bush, that was not W.W. This was this was the dad. Sorry. When Bill Clinton
prudent at this juncture.
Not gonna do it. Yeah, we don't get often just chance to use those impressions, but when George H.W. Bush was certain that Bill Clinton wouldn't beat him, not gonna do it. And it wouldn't be prudent. Can't beat me. I'm not 91. Beat Saddam Hussein, ate him, destroyed it. But then he lost. My friend was out of a job. He ended up getting hired on Dr. Dobson's staff, and we went out to Colorado once to visit our friend, and the friend said, "Hey, why don't you meet Dr. Jim Dobson?" And I was like, "What?" And Dobson's books had a huge impact on Lynn and me, and on Lynn's mom as she came back to the Lord and gave her life to the Lord and was trying to figure out what is the right biblical way forward. She was deeply influenced by the radio show and by Dobson's books. By the way, the radio show, I read it was at its peak, 4,000 radio stations daily. Is that accurate?
I could be right. It was a long time ago, and I don't remember I didn't really pay attention to station numbers until I helped Doc start Family Talk. And so,
which I think they grew to 1,500 when he left to focus on the family, started a new ministry.
I do remember we were reaching over 500 million people every single day. And a large percentage of that was because we were on state-sponsored radio / network in China, where Dr. Dobson's commentaries were being translated into Mandarin and Cantonese, and they were being played in supermarkets.
Amazing.
As people were going through the supermarket, they were hearing his parenting wisdom, And so a large percentage of our daily listenership was in China.
That is, yeah. He eventually told me that, and I was so stunned by this because it showed, at least, well, it showed a little bit of what communist China was trying to figure out. They didn't have a plan to raise kids with morals because they had already written out there is no God, and so they were struggling with what's sort of the North Star, as it were, of values. How do you inculcate that in parents? Now, obviously, communist China didn't allow Dobson's
gospel
teaching on the gospel and specifically the Word of God in more detail. But still, to have the leading Christian family, psychologist and counselor in the world become somebody that even the communist Chinese thought that guy knows what he's talking about. That was just amazing. So anyway, that's how Lynn and I first met him, and it was emotional for us. I mean, really, it was touching. A few years later, I was working for Steve Forbes, and who was the business leader, the editor-in-chief of Forbes magazine. And at that point, he had just run for president, done really well, but hadn't won, and was considering the possibility of running again. And I said, you need to build a relationship with these evangelical leaders. You didn't know them well, and they don't know you. They think of you as a business leader. They don't know that you're very pro-life and you've written about this for years. They don't know you're pro-adoption. They don't know all these other values. And so let's go spend time with them. And he said, great. Where would you start? I said, well, I have a friend who works for Jim Dobson. Let me call him and see if we could go out there and have lunch. And so that led to, times with, Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson and others. But the time with Dr. Dobson was so wonderful, and he and Steve Forbes, really hit it off. But after I finished my political career and started writing, at this point, we really, Dr. Dobson and I had a friendship. And so but I don't know, to this day, I don't remember ever asking him, well, how did you discover the novels? I think it was through Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh, because he was a consumer of the culture, for good or evil. He was watching Fox. He was listening to talk radio, certainly to Rush, whom he loved, and Sean Hannity, whom he loved. And but he also listened to people he deeply disagreed with. Mm-hmm. So all that to say, he then read some of the novels, but he read my first nonfiction book, Epicenter. And that's when he invited me. That's the first time I recall that he invited me to come on the show to talk, because, and I don't know if he'd ever talked about it on the air prior, his love for Israel and his interest in Bible prophecy. I don't think that certainly it wasn't a staple of the show. No. So I was sort of an anomaly, I think, not in his heart or his worldview, but in the topics that he covered: Israel, Bible prophecy, the end times. These were not things that he talked about. You're nodding, but for those who are listening rather than watching, am I right about that?
He would occasionally talk about it, but it wasn't a focus. I don't remember a focus of a single broadcast, the way in which when he brought you in. And I was there. I was the engineer for that one. And
I wish I'd known.
I remember.
And I wish I'd known where we were heading together downstream.
Yeah, but I just remember distinctly how much he raved about you, and how, when you first brought up the idea of the Joshua Fund, or I don't remember if it was still being planned, or it was in the middle of planning, or it had just launched. By the time I was
on, I think we had started it, and the Second Lebanon War had just erupted, and Epicenter, the book, had just released, and there was just enormous interest in the region, and he was among those who decided this is a good time to talk about this.
This is one of the reasons why I so adored the man, is he saw his platform as a vehicle to help promote and give light to these other organizations like MOPS, Mothers of Preschoolers, Moms in Touch, other organizations that he really liked what they were doing. He would give them this platform on those maybe 4,000 stations and do that. And I remember distinctly when you cast the vision for the Joshua Fund, he caught it. I mean, he caught it, and he was like, I'm in. I want to help try and support you. And I want to help try and bring this out there. Because I remember him talking about it after the fact,
Wow.
like long after you had gone. He just loved that idea of blessing Israel and her neighbors in the name of Jesus.
Yeah.
He loved it.
Well, I was so grateful because that's not something I knew about him. We'd covered a lot of things, but in the times I'd met with him prior, I don't think Israel had come up. Mostly because probably because I was working for other people, or I was just stopping by, didn't even know I was going to be meeting with him, but that's at the beginning. But as we became friends, we connected because I was working for Steve Forbes, because I was working for Rush Limbaugh as his research director, because I was helping Sean Hannity on a project that I was working for then former Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who would eventually become prime minister again, and the longest serving prime minister in the history of modern Israel. So those things were interesting to Dobson, and because I was a believer working for those different people, that was a point of connection. I remember once Netanyahu wanted to contact Dobson, and I became an intermediary, a back channel. And when Dobson would want to send a message to Netanyahu, we would go back the other direction. But it was because as I emerged as an author, as a public voice myself, which seemed completely unforeseeable, as that happened, he began to zero in that was actually a central element of what we both agreed on, because he told me once there aren't that many voices, evangelical voices that have a lot of experience with Israel. There are some, and he was very pro-Israel. Let me tell one quick story, and then maybe we'll go to a break in a moment. But he, on one of the shows, he said to me that he remembered in May 14th, 1948 in particular. I believe I think he just turned 13, because he was born in April of 36 or so. No, maybe 30. Anyway, so he was around 13, thereabouts. So May 4th, my math might be wrong, so forgive me. But the point is, he was a young teenager, and he remembered his mother one day, it happened to be May 14th, 1948, saying, Jimmy, come to the radio, come quickly. And as he got over to the radio, he said, he listened, and what she described is the state of Israel has just been reborn. The prime minister of Israel, this man, David Ben-Gurion, he just declared the independence of the state of Israel. And now President Harry Truman, the U.S. president, has just become the first leader in the world to recognize the state of Israel. And she said to him, do you understand what's happening? It's ancient Bible prophecy that says that Israel, which had, its people had lived in exile, been scattered to the ends of the earth after the Romans destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD and all the horror of the years that followed, that the Jews had lived in exile for 2,000 years. And now they're back in the land, or streaming back to the land. And now the only book in the world that has ever said that Israel would become a sovereign nation state again, and the Jews would return to the land and make the deserts bloom and rebuild the ancient ruins, was the Bible. And she said, Jimmy, we're listening to Bible prophecy come true, come to pass today. And he said that really struck him, because he came from a family of believers. He was a believer, but he was young. And the fact, this notion that ancient Bible prophecy that even that Jews had believed for 2,000 years, saying next year in Jerusalem we're going to be able to celebrate our Passover and our other holidays in a reborn state of Israel. But even many Christian leaders, even many of the church fathers, just didn't believe that those prophecies about the rebirth of Israel were literal. But Mrs. Dobson believed this, and her husband believed this, and the family and the church that they went to, they believed this, and she wanted him to know it. And he said that moved me. And to that point, Steve, I'm not certain that I had ever met somebody, I definitely hadn't met somebody as prominent as Dr. James Dobson, who was alive and, old enough to remember May 14th, 1948, and be able to say, my family believed that was prophecy. And suddenly, oh my gosh, it's literally happening on my radio right now. It was moving to him. It was moving to me. That was a very formative thing. I only wish he'd told me that before I wrote the book Epicenter, because I didn't, it wasn't in there. I need to write a new book, and I need to include that story.
Yeah. I remember him distinctly, him telling that story on the broadcasts with you. I think he told it probably a couple different times. Every time you would bring that on, I think most of them, he would mention that story. And his parents had such an incredible impact on him. I mean, For listeners that don't know, his dad was an evangelist, an itinerant evangelist that would travel around and do tent revival stuff and preach at churches, that kind of stuff. And his mom would stay at home. And it got to the point where Doc was 10, 11, maybe 12. And Doc's mom saw a distinct need for Dad to be around. So they packed up everything, and he got a job at a small church as the pastor. So that way he was there for his son, his only child, their only child, because Doc was a C-section baby back in the 30s, when in a C-section, you were never having kids ever again.
Yeah. Wow.
Because of the way in which they did it. Yeah. His parents had such a tremendous influence on him.
Well, and I saw an interview with that Dr. Dobson did with Wendy Griffith from CBN News. This is a number of years ago, but I watched it the other day, and I was struck because he said, in those years, he was starting to move in the wrong direction spiritually and in terms of getting himself in trouble. Maybe not the type of trouble we think of kids getting in today, but going in the wrong direction. He said, these are his words. And it was because he didn't have a father around. He had a father that loved him and a father that knew the word and preached the gospel, but he wasn't around enough. And Mrs. Dobson, his mother, said to him one day, he remonstrated him for something. And she said, I know what you've been up to, and it's wrong. And Dr. Dobson, Jimmy at the time was like, well, I'm going to keep doing it. Like, just open defiance.
Yeah.
And she said, okay, we'll see about that. And she picked up the phone and she called her husband, and happened to get him right then, and said, I need you to be home. And he canceled 4 years worth of planned speaking engagements, and came home and started taking, I'm going to get emotional, taking Jim fishing and hunting and just like investing in this boy. Proactive love, but also to correct and to compensate for the deficiency of, okay, Dad was doing the work of the kingdom, but he was gone, and it was having a negative effect. And so this was important. Dobson said his life changed not just because of Jesus, but because of a father and a mother who saw that as much as she could do, he needed a father. Now, I realize there are listeners out there who, you're a single mom and their dad is gone for bad reasons, or they've gone home to be with the Lord or whatever. And so the Lord compensates. Of course, God says he is the father to the fatherless. But if there's a father to be had and he knows the Lord, he needs to readjust his own priorities. And that had a huge effect on him. So, but yeah, the whole part about Israel and his Jim's interest in Bible prophecy, in end times, again, not a major topic on the show, but something very dear to his heart. When we come back, we do have to take a break. When we come back, I know because you're an audio engineer, you're a producer, this is what you do. You have dug up some clips of me on various shows with Dr. Dobson over the years. We'll listen to some of those. That'll be fun to kind of brush off. And then I want to talk about some of the controversy about him and some of your own reactions to some of that, because standing for biblical truth in this day and age is not an easy thing to do, and people will hate you for it. So the spiritual warfare around Jim and Shirley Dobson and their team and their family was intense, and even in death, It is erupting all over again. And but I appreciate, he had a very strong, but I would say gentle manner. He was he had a sort of a the velvet hammer in a sense. He was a gentleman, but he had strong convictions, and you couldn't shake him off of those. But people have hated him for this. All right, we'll take a break. Don't go away. We're going to continue with this sort of retrospective, remembering the life, the impact of Dr. James Dobson. He's just passed away at the age of 89. He is home with the Lord now. He has run his race. He's finished his race. And I have no doubt in my mind that he heard from Jesus personally, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You were faithful in a few things. I'll put you in charge of more things. Enter into the joy of your master." We'll be back on Inside the Epicenter in just a moment.
This is Inside the Epicenter with Joel Rosenberg. I'm Lynn Rosenberg, and today, as we reflect on the life and ministry of Dr. James Dobson, I'm reminded of Paul's words in 2 Timothy 4, verse 7. "I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith." Dr. Dobson certainly modeled that kind of steadfast faith and impact across generations of people. As you continue listening, we'd encourage you to take the time this week to pray for 3 things. First of all, pray for the Dobson family that they would experience God's comfort and peace during this season of great loss. Secondly, pray for Christian leaders worldwide that they would lead with courage, wisdom, and integrity, that they would follow the example of those like Dr. Dobson who have finished well. And finally, pray for the next generation, that young men and women would rise up with boldness to proclaim the gospel and to carry the mantle of faith forward into the future.
Welcome back to Inside the Epicenter. I'm Joel Rosenberg, your co-host, and I'm in Paris today. Lynn and I are here meeting with evangelical leaders from the Middle East and having a chance to talk about what God is doing in the Middle East. This is where we happen to be able to meet them, and this is the window that we got to do it. So I'm really glad to be able to do this. And I want to welcome back to the podcast our producer, who's uniquely qualified to be a part of the show, not just behind the scenes, but on the show. Steve Reiter was worked closely with Dr. Dobson for 15 years, including being his chief engineer and in charge of the broadcast team at Focus on the Family, and later helping him, was the second employee ever hired to work for Dr. Dobson when Dobson started a new ministry, the Dr. James Dobson Family Institute, and started a new radio show called Family Talk. Steve, welcome back from the break, and it's great to be with you.
Thank you, my friend. So we have some clips that we're going to play from some of those broadcasts where first he talks about you, refers to you as someone he thought of as one of the sons of Issachar. It was a biblical term that he always used whenever he thought of you, because you saw the times and you knew what to do. And that's the way in which he saw you. And then the other 2 clips are just some playful banter between the 2 of you, because he adored you, my man. He adored you.
Well, he had such a profound impact. We talked about it in the earlier part of the show. I'm not someone easily awed by Christian leaders or leaders in general. I love leaders, and I love helping them. I love investing in them. I love learning from them. But I was at a stage in my life when Lynn and I first met Dr. Dobson that it was deeply emotional to me, because, to meet someone who's had a profound influence on you when you never met him, but because of his books, because of the radio show, an impact on our marriage, an impact on how we saw parenting, which we were just becoming parents. This was a big deal to Lynn and me. And also, as I mentioned earlier, just recap it though, Dr. Dobson had a profound impact on my parents and on Lynn's mom in particular, who, as she came to the Lord later, gave her life back to the Lord later in her life and began to learn how to grow in her faith in Jesus Christ. She loved listening to Dr. Dobson, and she loved reading his books. And so we were also thanking him on her behalf. It's a tremendous influence that you can have through media, as an author, and certainly through radio and podcasting, with people that you're unlikely to ever meet. But I found him such a man of character, a kind man. And I have to say, I'm sorry that we didn't even cover this in the first half, Steve, but never a hint, a whiff of scandal. Like this man practiced what he preached. And can you imagine if you became the leading Christian spokesman on the family, if you'd had an affair, if you blew up your marriage, if your kids hated you and turned into serial killers? I mean, like that's nothing ever, anything like that.
He and I had a conversation one time in his office at Family Talk, and he told me, Steve, I don't struggle with most of the stuff that most of the men leaders in the evangelical movement struggle with. I don't struggle with women. I personally saw the way in which he adored Shirley. I mean,
they were
them
head over heels in love.
Two of them against the world.
Like they were still in college together. Yeah.
And he also said, I don't struggle with money. I mean, he didn't have an ostentatious car. In fact, he made so much money on his books. He never took a salary from Focus, never took a salary from Family Talk. Instead, he was the number one volunteer at both of those organizations because he made all of his money via his books, which I so admired him for that. And he was very aware of how an ostentatious car could appear to a donor, even though he was personally paying for it out of his money from speaking and writing books and that kind of stuff. It was one of those things where that's the way it was. And so, but he did tell me, he said, I don't struggle with women. I don't struggle with money, but I do struggle with pride. And he had that ability to be able to see that kind of stuff and self-reflect in that kind of a way that he understood this is the one area in which I can stumble. And so, I agree.
Once you identify it and you ask people to come around you as a board, as a staff, as a team to keep you accountable and keep you humble. I have boys that are self-appointed in this respect. My 4 sons have decided that their mission in life is to mock and humiliate me just to keep me, grounded. And they used to, when my books first came out, this is a little bit aside, but when my book started becoming, bestsellers, the kids were young, but they wanted to scroll through Amazon reviews, not to read the good ones and say, Dad, I'm just so proud of you. They would find the worst ones, the ones that were mean, that were like nasty. And Dad, this is another one. And they would love to find bad reviews, like the Washington Post that described my first novel as an act of terrorism against the reader's brain. They loved that one, and they often looked for others. So good for Dobson. He had people to keep him grounded.
So Joel, let's play those clips and then let's come out and talk about the controversy.
Well, we talked about your book, Epicenter. That is a nonfiction work, but you have had a knack for recognizing the times, like the Sons of Issachar, and knowing what to do. The books that you've written have been, in some cases, tragically right on, including the 9/11 experience.
That's true. The first novel, The Last Jihad, opens with a kamikaze attack against an American city by radical Islamic jihadists, and it leads to a war between the United States and Saddam Hussein over terrorism and weapons of mass destruction, all which was written before any of it happened. That's why I say in the author's note of Dead Heat, I pray to God nothing in this novel ever comes true, because I don't want people to think
it's pretty stark.
That I'm seeing a vision in the middle of the night and saying exactly what's going to happen. Well, Jews have lived with anxiety about people wanting to destroy us for a long time. You know, Dr. Dobson, I remember a far side.
By the way, you said us because your father is Jewish.
Yes, my father was raised Orthodox Jewish, His family, as Orthodox Jews, escaped out of Russia around 1907. He now is a believer that Jesus is the Messiah. And my mom is English Methodist WASP.
And
that side of the family. And both of them are here with me today. And it's an honor. And both of them came to know the Lord Jesus as their Savior in 1973. So some people would say, I'm not Jewish because my mother's not. Other would say, with a name like Joel Rosenberg, it's got to be Jewish. So I let other people argue over that.
Now, I interrupted you in mid-thought. Go ahead.
Well, just the basic idea is that there was a Far Side cartoon back in the 1980s done by Gary Larson, little funny animals with funny little sayings. And there were two deer standing in the forest, and one deer had a bullseye on its chest, and the deer without the bullseye said to the deer with the bullseye, "Bummer of a birthmark, pal."
That's his best known cartoon.
That's my favorite, and that's what it feels like to be Jewish in the world, that you've been born with a bullseye. And people say, "Oh, you Jews, you're the chosen people. You think you're so great." Well, we're like, God could have chosen someone else, really. I mean, like Hitler chose us, Ahmadinejad chose us, the Pharaoh chose us, Stalin. Let him choose somebody else. We're okay with that.
Do you remember Tevier in Fiddler on the Roof said, "Can't once in a while you choose somebody else?"
And that's the feeling. Line? So what are why do we get all the curses of all these people hating us and wanting to annihilate us? What is that? Where did that come from? So Jews know this. It's just part of Jewish life. And it causes a lot of sadness. But that's why Israel had to be in the modern age. A lot of Jews who recreated the Jewish state did not do so for biblical reasons. They did so for pure survival reasons, and it happened to converge with God's plan and purpose, but it's a sanctuary.
Joel, my wife Shirley and I have been reading First Chronicles, and about 3 days ago we read chapter 17, which is describing David's last days on earth. And one morning, Nathan the prophet came to David and said that the Lord had spoken to him the previous night through a dream. And in the dream, God told him that David's son, it turned out to be Solomon, although he was not named at that point, would build a temple, and then there would be a person in his bloodline on the throne forever. And how could that be? Forever is forever. I mean, it didn't say for 1,000 years, it said forever. And the only way that could be fulfilled is through Jesus, who is now on the throne. It's really exciting reading those Old Testament scriptures. Psalms 122 says, "Pray for the peace of Jerusalem."
And that's not the Yasser Arafat edition where it says, "Pray for a piece of Jerusalem," and then kill all the Jews and then get the whole thing. Right. This is pray for the peace of Jerusalem. The psalmist commands us that. But and it's the lack of peace, geopolitical and personal, that's opening the doors in Israel and in the Muslim world to people thinking, whatever religious system I was brought up in, it is not working. I don't have peace. I don't have hope. I don't have assurance of salvation. And that's why they're hungering to hear the love and the power of Jesus, and people are responding, Jews and Muslims, in numbers we have absolutely never seen on the history of the planet to date. And this is the moment to ask ourselves, as followers of Jesus in the United States, Canada, wherever your listeners are listening, the question is, okay, so what? So what? God is working, and what is our role in it? And I think that's the big question at the 60th anniversary that all Christians need to ask themselves. How can I bless Israel and her neighbors in the name of Jesus?
Wow. Well, that's fun to remember those moments with him. It's very moving to think that I even got to meet him. I mean, there's been quite a list of major evangelical leaders whom the Lord has called home over the past year and a half. Beverly LaHaye, who founded Concerned Women for America, was the wife of Dr. Tim LaHaye. That was last year. Henry Blackaby, the Baptist theologian who talked about walk with God, how to know God, how to please God, and how to, see where God is working and then come alongside and join him. And Blackaby has gone home to be with the Lord earlier this year, just this year, 2025. We've seen Kay Arthur, our dear friend and the head of founder of Precept Ministries. Lynn and I absolutely loved her. In fact, Kay Arthur was a mentor to Lynn when Lynn was in seminary, getting her master's degree, and Kay really spent quite a bit of time with her, investing in her and challenging her and asking her good questions. And then someone we have honored on this show, John MacArthur, pastor at Grace Community Church in California, founder.
Who you interviewed on this broadcast there near his church or at his church. I forget where you guys recorded it, but
yeah.
I remember that recording.
And so that's a huge loss. And these two losses were personal. We happen to know these two, but Kay Arthur and John MacArthur, and then Jim Dobson. So I'm not sure what's going to happen in the rest of this year, but the Lord seems to be calling some of the major influencers over the last 50 years, 25 to 50 years, calling them home to be with him. I want to talk a little bit in this part of the podcast, Steve. You knew him for 15 years. You worked so closely with him, but people hated him. I mean, people like us loved him, but because he had such a profound effect, and he was standing up against a culture which was saying there is no God, and even if there is a God, the Bible doesn't speak. It is not God's book, and if you read the Bible, it's all wrong, and do it the opposite. And like, he took a stand for the unborn. He took a stand for biblical marriage of one man and one woman, and that's it, And he took a stand for values and virtues and precepts that the world hates. And wow, in his life, he was scorched, but in his death, social media has gone crazy with some of the most hateful and vitriolic and just disgusting screeds against him. What do you make of all that?
It was shocking. It was very shocking. I remember checking X a few times, looking at threads, and all I saw, I expected most of the pushback to be his stance against same-sex marriage, which was like the biggest thing that I ever heard during my time there. Was he's anti-gay, anti-lesbian, all of this stuff. And he loved the individual, but he believed that instituting same-sex marriage would take away from traditional marriit's and
he believed there were consequences. And in other words, because he loved people, he said, look, God is against this, and it's don't take that lightly. If God says this is wrong, and if he says that I'm against this and there are consequences, the loving thing to do is to say there are consequences, as you would with a parent on anything else. It wasn't hatred, but it was certainly weaponized against him. But what do you mean? You thought? Are you saying that's not what people are most?
It was almost nothing about that. It was almost nothing about that. It was all about corporal punishment, where people blamed him for the trauma of their parents spanking them or beating them, taking it far to the extreme. And
so let's define some of that, right? So what did he teach, and what specifically did he not teach?
Yeah, so he taught in Dare to Discipline, when your child openly defies you, you set them down, you calmly tell them you will not do this again. If they do it again, then you bring out a paddle, a wooden spoon, something like that. You spank them. As soon as things kind of calm down, you explain to them why you did this. You explain to them that you love them, you hug them, and go about the business. It's never done in an angry way. It's never done in a way to inflict real pain. Instead, just enough to get their attention. I mean, any parent knows, or any person that was spanked, it doesn't take a lot when you're a kid to get hit in the butt, that very tender spot where it catches your attention and it hurts. It's a very tender area of the body. And so do it in a firm enough way that it doesn't leave a mark or anything like that.
You're sending a message of
Exactly.
Don't go there.
You're pulling them out of
consequences.
You're redirecting them. You're pulling them out of that and telling them that there are consequences for their actions. I mean, my girlfriend and I were just talking about this recently where we were spanked. But here's the thing. We deserved it. We were doing stuff we shouldn't have done. And our parents loved us and didn't cross any lines. But so much of it was about, I blame him for my parents spanking me or beating me and causing this trauma. And so I hope he rots in hell. Yeah. I hope he's getting what he deserves in hell. And these kinds of things that I'm like, it's people don't understand what he actually taught and how many of these parents that these adults now are talking about were taking it way too far.
Yeah, and he was explicit in Dare to Discipline, and certainly on the radio show and other interviews and other conversations of the difference between spanking and abuse, and yes. he was deeply opposed to abuse, and he was this was something that he was drawing very clear lines. If you were listening to him, you couldn't miss it. If you were choosing to hate him because he was teaching parents, challenging parents, dare to discipline. Dr. Benjamin Spock, the guy who defined child raising for the previous 30 years, during a period of tremendous permissiveness that led to a massive crack up of the American culture and a breakdown of the family. These were principles, some of them, of the Dr. Benjamin Spock principles were not biblical, and those that sort of let your kids just do what they want, that was having a huge negative effect on the kids, on the families, and on the culture. And Dr. Dobson emerged to say, no, it's going to take courage, and don't go too far. And this is what this means, and this is what this means. This is how to do it. But you have to be the parent, and the Bible commands you to be the parent. You're the authority in that family. You're not a dictator, but you are the authority. And if you don't teach your children right from wrong, they're going to make catastrophic, or they might make catastrophic decisions that could ruin their lives and the lives of people around them.
Yes, 100%. And it's sad to see that people don't look at the nuances and instead just straight demonize someone who did a lot of good. I mean, Joel, I can't tell you the number of times I would be traveling with him. I remember one time in particular, we were in Nashville, Tennessee. We sat down. The restaurant was relatively empty because I think we got there at like 1, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, something like that. So it was relatively empty. And someone didn't see his face, heard his voice. A mom came running over to us and was weeping about how we had impacted her family because they had an autistic son, and the resources that Focus just gave away to her to help her out. And she wept about how we helped them and helped their family. So many people. I remember stepping off of a private plane that one of the board members had donated to us in, I think it was 2000. Okay. We were recording in Bakersfield and then Ojai, California. And the guy, as soon as he saw my Focus on the Family polo shirt, he was like, Focus on the Family, I love them. And I was like, just wait, he's about to step off. And Doc stepped off. And this guy that was helping us get off this private plane, just talked about how Focus had impacted his marriage and made him a better father and a better husband. And it was over and over again. And Doc was he was so humble about that. He was just, I'm just doing what I know how to do. And just this, that Southern Texas, Louisiana, which is the areas in which he grew up, just that kind of way that he had about him. And it is tremendous. I am struck, there are some Christian leaders I've met over the years who they really do have larger than life personalities. It's not just the message. They are very colorful, interesting people who are very dynamic, and they walk in a room and the molecules change. I think of Pat Robertson had that in his younger years. Certainly Jerry Falwell had that, the founder of the first one, Pat Robertson, of course, the founder of CBN and CBN News and the 700 Club and all, the largest Christian media TV empire at the time.
although I think TBN became larger, but still a huge impact. Jerry Falwell, the founder of Liberty University, one of the founders of the Moral Majority, and what became known as by some as the religious right. These were very colorful personalities. I happened to meet them sort of later in the ministries, where they were a little older and a little, I don't know, less. They toned down a little bit. But Dr. Dobson was always that Southern gentleman. I don't think of his personality as larger than life. But he had strong convictions, and those broke through. I think it was a perfect match for radio, because I think, if you're a booming personality, maybe that works on television. I don't know that it works in the intimacy of radio, where you're sort of in the car and you're in the kitchen with somebody. It's a little bit different. And if you come off as too hot, you can undermine your own message. And if the message was how to love your husband, love your wife, how to love your children, how to be tender, how to be, and you come off as, harsh or, loud or whatever, you're sort of undermining your own message. But that wasn't Dr. Dobson. I was touched. You said it, but it should be underscored. Who he was on the radio was not some construct that he became because you couldn't see him. No, this is who he was. He just brought his heart for Jesus, his heart for the Word, his heart for the family to the radio dial. And as you said, millions and millions and millions, at one point, 500 million, maybe people a day heard his teachings. What are some of the other things, as we're going to need to land the plane here soon, but some of the other memories and sort of lessons from his life would you share, Steve Reiter, who, you worked for him for 15 years?
Yeah. Some memories. Wow. There's so many. I distinctly remember being with him in Nashville. I think it was that time that the woman came up to us, and he was writing Bringing Up Girls. And on one of his trips out there, he went out there a few times, right, bringing up girls to kind of get away. And I remember he got the call that Focus was inducted into the Radio Hall of Fame, the first quote unquote religious broadcast ever inducted in the Radio Hall of Fame. We beat out Dr. Laura, we beat out Bob Costas, and we beat out the quote unquote king of radio, Howard Stern. And he was giddy. Wow. Joel, he was giddy about it. I mean, it was something. And he looked at me, he's like, "You're coming. You and Elizabeth are coming," my late wife. And so she got this beautiful dress, and we dressed up. I rented a tux and was there for the induction ceremony. And I've got a picture of me, Elizabeth, Doc, and Shirley. And it's one of my favorite pictures of Elizabeth and I, because it was just, it was such a great time. I remember on one of my trips to Nashville, he was like, "I need to introduce you to Southern cooking." He was like, "You ever had ever had hush puppies? You ever had fried catfish?" I'm like, "No." He's like, "I'm taking you." And I remember I loved sweet tea. He introduced me to sweet tea, and I drank so much sweet tea. I was up until 2 a.m. before I could finally get to sleep. And the next day I was dragging. I was drinking 5-hour energies to try and stay cognizant enough to, I remember we went to record with Chuck Colson. Chuck Colson happened to be in Nashville at the same time. And so we got a recording of Doc and Chuck, who were dear, dear, dear friends, very close friends.
Wow. And
afterwards, Doc and Chuck, we all went out to lunch, but Doc and Chuck kind of went off by themselves. And I was hanging out with Chuck's team, and we were just busy talking. I remember getting a call on one of those Nashville trips on a Friday. He was like, "Steve, I just went through the Carter House Museum. It's a Battle of Franklin Civil War Museum. The historian that gave me the tour, David Fraley, incredible Christian guy, an amazing storyteller. You need to get out here." And so I was out there on Monday is when he wanted me out there.
Okay.
And so I remember driving out to the recording, to the museum, and I was like, "Doc, all right, I got an idea for you. I've got the setup. We're going to do, what if we do day 1 like we normally do? We set up the microphones, you talk back and forth. But what if day 2, I've got this handheld recorder, and what if we go out and we walk the paths and we do something different that we've never done on the broadcast, as far as I know, and we do this NPR style kind of thing where we're describing for listeners what we're seeing, and you hear the floorboards creaking as you're walking through the Carter house, and you're describing these bullet holes still in the barn from the Battle of Franklin. And he was like, oh, let's do this. And I remember when we got back, I had 3 days worth of content. And I was like, this is choice radio. It's really, really good. These stories are incredible. I remember David Fraley painting this picture in the Carter house. The Carter house was where they did the amputations and the surgeries. And he described having FBI agents with their bioluminescent lights seeing blood splatter on these 16-foot ceilings. And the FBI agents, still 150 years later, it was still there. And these FBI agents were just quiet in such awe of the history that had gone on there. And so we came back. I had 3 days worth of broadcasts. The producers, because it was different than what we normally did, they only wanted a 1 day.
Okay.
But Doc and I really connected on history, especially Civil War and World War II. Okay. And so I fought like all get out to try and get a 3 day. We ended up compromising at 2. And within 2 weeks, this aired beginning of December. Within 2 weeks, it was a top 10 broadcast of the year. Oh, wow. I was getting rave reviews. That's awesome. That was when I was like, oh yeah, I felt good. I felt good about fighting for that one. Good. I just loved the guy. I told him at one point, I said, when I was at Family Talk, I was like, Doc, I look at you as one of my dad's brothers. You've been such an influence on me, not just during the 15 years that I worked for him, but prior. My mom was a big focus on the family supporter growing up. And I remember she locked me in her room, her and Dad's room, my parents' room, and handed me the Preparing for Adolescence tape series when I was 10 or 11 and said, you're listening to this. Doc was the one that taught me the birds and the bees. Wow. And it's, that's amazing. So I have this long history of understanding who he was, then working for him. And he really was like an uncle to me. I genuinely loved his advice for me. And this is the one that's going to choke me up, man. Wow. 2 days after Elizabeth died in May of 2020, he and Shirley called. And he was the consummate psychologist, where he was asking me questions. Where do you see God working in this? What's going on? What's going on with your heart? How are you doing? And I remember he and Shirley praying for me at the end of that call. Wow. I loved the man. I did.
I'm so glad.
I loved him. He was such a great guy, and a huge impact in my life. And I consider it one of the great honors of my life, having to been in that place where I got to work for him and work around him in a way that very, 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 very few employees at Focus ever did.
Yeah, the organization grew to several thousand people, and yet that didn't mean that people all got to interact with him or for hours on a day or every single day. That's often the case in a ministry, but to have worked with him for so long and still have that respect, I think is very encouraging, because we're hearing, I'm not going to mention names, but there are stories over the years now that we're hearing about pastors and ministry leaders that have fallen, and that people talked about what a nightmare it was to work with that person. Out front, it was all roses and everything seemed good and they had a great reputation, but behind the scenes, the team themselves knew that things were not good, or that they were super controlling, they were mean to their staffs. And we had, even in this, in the secular world, right? Ellen DeGeneres, huge, popular, seemed so friendly. But then her staff said she was just mean. And, but I think your testimony about him is important. And one of the reasons that I want, and you are also the producer of this show. And I think Dr. Dobson was an important voice in American Christian media and Christian society, because it's his teachings from the scriptures that helped us figure out practically how are we supposed to raise our children and work on our marriages and build stronger community. And that is really an incredible legacy. Yeah. Any last thoughts, comments before we wrap up? We do need to wrap up. This has been fun to remember him. And I do want people to pray for Shirley and for the Family Talk team and the whole community around the Dobsons in Colorado Springs who love him dearly. And, and Shirley's still serving Jesus. And but this is a big blow. She's lost the love of her life.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny that you're in Paris recording this because my last big trip outside of America trip with Dr. Dobson was to France. We recorded at Normandy American Cemetery. We walked Omaha Beach together and we got these amazing stories. And it was a big 50th anniversary trip for Doc and Shirley and then some friends of theirs. And I remember Danae, their daughter, came with, and it was just an incredible time to just sit around a table in Caen, France, in northern France, in Normandy, to have dinner with him there and drive him around and show him around, and just seeing his love for history and what he heard about as a kid when the Normandy, storming the beaches of Normandy happened in 1944, I believe.
Yeah.
June of 44, June 6th, if I remember right. And so I think it's fitting that you're recording it there because that was an incredible trip that they did for their 50th anniversary. And I was able to jump in and do some recording at Normandy American Cemetery. And it's a very precious moment and probably my favorite picture of Doc and I, because he and I are standing. It's a picture taken behind us. I've got my backpack on, my recording backpack on, and my back is turned to the camera, but he's got his hand on my back and he's describing for me and the listeners what it is that he's seeing.
Wow.
And it was just that I loved the guy. Words can't describe how much I adored the man.
Bless you, Steve Reiter. I'm so grateful for your friendship and, of course, the critical role that you have made in not only creating the Inside the Epicenter podcast, but I should have mentioned it up front, but I certainly don't want to, focus on us more than on Dr. Dobson in this program. But we've just found out that this podcast has now moved into the top 1%. The top 1% of all podcasts in the world. And we had been at 4% a year or two ago, and then to 1.5%. I wasn't thinking we were going to move any higher, but that's because this is connecting with people. And I'm grateful for you. And I'm grateful for your love for Dr. Dobson, your loyalty to him, but also your ability as an eyewitness to share what you loved about him, why you loved him. And I just want to close by saying to everyone, not every evangelical leader understands God's love for Israel and the Jewish people or his love for the neighbors. Not every evangelical leader that you've heard of, and even that if you admire them, not all of them really understand Bible prophecy or care. But Dr. Dobson was somebody who did. He did care about these things. He had been brought up well with good, solid Bible teaching. His mother had, called him urgently over to the radio. You are listening to Bible prophecy come to pass today. Jimmy, as she said to him on May 14th, 1948, when I don't know anyone else who called him Jimmy, but maybe Shirley did. I never heard of that. I think she called it just Jim in my hearing. But May 14th, 1948, that when Israel was reborn as a sovereign country in the modern era, this had an impact in the Dobson household. And it's one of the things that maybe is not the most known thing about him, but it's something that endeared him very much to me and that he spoke about on the program. And may his tribe increase. Well, for Steve Reiter and for Lynn and for our entire Inside the Epicenter team, thank you so much for listening. I pray you share this episode with others. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe to Inside the Epicenter. Rate us. Comment on this. Send us information. You go to the show notes and see an article that I wrote about Dr. Dobson for All Israel News. Maybe Steve can fit in. I don't know if it'll work. If we can find a way to put in some of these pictures that he's mentioned, we'll see. Maybe on the video, on the YouTube version. And then if you can, as we close out, if you are able to give a donation to the Josh Fund, we'd really appreciate it. Helping educate the church about God's love and prophetic plan for Israel and her neighbors is an important element of what's going on, because there's such an assault, an avalanche of lies against Israel and the Jewish people, and against Muslims as well, and against the church in the Middle East. And how do we advance the kingdom? How do we fulfill the Great Commission? How do we strengthen the church in Israel and in the Arab Muslim world to preach the gospel, to make disciples, to care for the poor and needy, to care for widows and orphans, and to advance the Great Commission and to educate other Christians? That's the work of the Joshua Fund. That's why we want to put a special emphasis on the life, faith, and impact of Dr. James Dobson. And if you can become a monthly donor, an Epicenter ally, we call it, we would be particularly grateful. So go to joshuafund.com. Again, joshuafund.com. You'll see a big donate button right in the top right-hand corner. That's where you can click. You can make a secure, tax-deductible online donation, a one-time gift, or if you're able, become a monthly donor, and that'll really help us understand how committed that you are and how we can budget going forward. There are major ways that we are continuing to need to expand our income if God would be so merciful and you would be so generous, because there are just so many needs in Israel and the Arab Muslim world today. The church is doing an amazing job, but they are under-resourced in that part of the world. So thank you so much. Again, Lord willing, we'll talk to you next time right here on Inside the Epicenter.
Hey, I'm Joel Rosenberg. On your left, you'll find some videos we've chosen specifically for you. We look forward to partnering with you to bless Israel and her neighbors in the name of Jesus.